Hello, I would like to welcome you to this pretty long video about the history of contact lenses. This is something I'm passionate about. I'm an optometrist. My name is Dr. Clark Hyde, and this video is actually created for the staff of 2020 Vision Care, but anyone can watch it. Patients, anyone interested in learning about the interesting aspects of contact lenses, where they came from, how the concepts began, and all that other stuff. So I'm going to try to make this as brief as I can, but keep it very informative. Just a little bit about myself. I am an optometrist. I've been fitting contact lenses for 10 years or more. I fit all sorts of contact lenses, probably the stuff that you've heard of before, just monthly soft contact lenses, daily disposable contact lenses, as well as a whole bunch of other specialty contact lenses like modern day scleral contact lenses, which you'll hear about later, some RGPs. I fit ortho keratology contact lenses and all sorts of things. And in all my experience, which I still am learning a lot, I feel very confident in these fitting these contact lenses. I've seen a lot of stuff. I've seen people misuse their contact lenses and the repercussions that come from that. I've seen all sorts of things. Today we're going to focus on the history of contact lenses, and I'm just going to get right into it. I'm not an expert at recording videos, but I'm going to use a PowerPoint presentation today, and so I'll go right to it. We're going to be talking about the history, the advancements, and the miracle of contact lenses. So just to at the beginning here, just to get ourselves wrapped into what we're up to, contact lenses have been around for a very long time. Although the idea of it is fairly recent. I mean, if you rewound time about 100 years ago, the idea of sticking something into your eye to make you see better was just kind of a strange concept. Nowadays, it's a super normal thing. Over 14 million contact lens wearers throughout the world. That's estimated, of course. And then, although I don't live in the United States, these statistics are from the United States. From somewhere. I mean, the references are at the bottom. But over 2/3 of contact lens wearers are females, and all sorts of people wear contacts, young and old, as you can see there. The first idea of contact lenses on the eye started, like most awesome things, just as a concept. And the first person, at least that we know about, that proposed the idea of having a contact lens is Leonardo da Vinci. Now his proposal was quite unique. It was mostly just having to do with the fact that he felt like he could change how he or other people saw by contacting the eye with water and using a bowl as a refractive device, or just as a means of changing how the light goes into the eye. And so this was more of a concept that he had thought about. And as funny as it is to us, and I'm pretty sure that if you did this experiment, it would be much different than what wearing a contact would be like. The principles were there. The ideas were stirring. If you fast forward time to the about 300 years later, in the 1800s, a guy named Sir John Herschel took Da Vinci's idea, and we don't even know if he knew about Da Vinci's concepts, but he said that, in his words, that if you put some transparent animal jelly contained in a spherical capsule of glass applied to the surface of the eye, that it would probably work. Again, just a concept. We're not sure if he actually tried it, but the idea was totally there. And then in the late 1880s, let's be clear, three people independently from themselves, as far as we know, experimented with the first actual contact lenses. Adolf Fick, Swiss ophthalmologist, Eugene Kalt, a French ophthalmologist, and August Mueller, who was a German medical student. Talk about a highly motivated person. All three of these, actually, to want to stick something in their own eyes to make themselves or other people see better. We are told that they actually tried this, and they used blown glass bubbles or ground and polished glass. Now, putting glass in the eyeball is not the most comfortable thing, as I'm sure you can imagine. But these people actually did it, and they tried. Obviously, there wasn't a lot of success because it would have taken off pretty early. But again, these first experiments were there, and it wasn't until the 1900s, specifically the 1930s, that a guy named William Finebloom decided that he would actually develop some systematic way of reproducing contact lenses and putting them in the eyes. And over here, as you can see, this is his fitting set. So he sold these to optometrists like myself throughout the country. He sold them this, and he said, you try different shapes, and once you get the shape right, well, I'll send you the power. Although this was totally crazy talk to most of the public, this is where kind of things started rolling a little bit. These contact lenses, as you can imagine, were not very comfortable. They're very big, bulky, and they were made of glass, so super heavy. And in case you didn't know, oxygen can't go through glass. And so not a very healthy thing either. But the thing that he was most famous for was actually proposing and actually using, instead of glass, a specific type of plastic, plexiglass in particular, otherwise a particular type of it called PMMA. When he was developing this idea, World War II was happening, and they realized that airplane pilots who had their airplane windshields, I'm not an airplane pilot, so I don't know if I'm using the right words, but the windshields that were made of plastic or plexiglass or PMMA, when shards of glass or PMMA, went into these airplane pilots' eyeballs, it turns out that these pilots fared better than the pilots who had glass put into their eyes. So they realized that this PMMA stuff might be better suited for use on a person rather than glass. Not only that, but PMMA is a lot lighter than glass. So this Finebloom guy became probably his biggest contribution to contact lenses was deciding to use a different material other than glass, PMMA. Now, as you look at these contacts, I've already talked a little bit about some of the obvious things that would not be very happy about using these contact lenses. I've mentioned a few. They don't breathe well. In case you're wondering, the cornea needs oxygen to survive. I'll take a moment to just explain that the cornea is an avascular tissue, which just means that there's no blood vessels going into it to supply it with oxygen, and therefore it relies almost exclusively on the exterior environment, otherwise known as just the air around it. Of course, it does get some oxygen from the fluid behind it as well, but the vast majority is from the front and in the air around us. So putting glass on the cornea causes there to be some significant biological problems. Hypoxia is a word we use, which just means that a tissue isn't getting enough oxygen. And so these contact lenses, even though they could be fit and worn, were not breathable. Even the PMMA could not allow oxygen in and out, and therefore they couldn't be worn for very long, let alone put in your eye easily. And so this was still in its very infantile stages, but the concept was starting to become something that could be at least thought about in a reasonable way. These contacts started being made for the brave, I guess, for the people who were brave enough to stick them in their eyes. And over time, a guy named Kevin Toohey, he was an optician, and he was in one of these labs that made these types of contact lenses. And as with most awesome or cool inventions, well, not most, but many cool inventions or concepts, this happened by accident. He was cutting one of these lenses, and the center part, which is right here, got disconnected from this outside layer, this outside part of the contact lenses, and it left this little button. And this Kevin Toohey guy, instead of throwing away or discarding the accident, he looked at this central little button and he said to himself, hey, I think I could probably put that in my eye. Let's see how that goes. By the way, this white part of the eye that you see is called the sclera of the eye. And then the central part that covers the colored iris is called the cornea. So up until this point, contact lenses had been what we would call scleral lenses. These are just contacts that just fit over the entire eyeball. And for the first time ever, this little tiny button that would only fit on the cornea, or what's in front of this colored part, he stuck it in his eye and he realized that it actually worked and that it kind of stayed in place. Obviously, he had to do a lot of fine-tuning with this. He learned that if you polish the edges and do all sorts of things, it could actually fit a little better. But he patented this first corneal contact lens idea back in 1948. Some of you watching this might even be old enough to remember 1948. And obviously not very many people wore contacts back then, but this is kind of where things started to take off a little bit. Obviously, some advancements, as you can imagine, is that the contact could go in easier. Oxygen could go around a little bit more, and so they were able to be tolerated for a little bit longer as far as the tissues were concerned. So that was a pretty cool discovery. And then on top of that, they were able to fine-tune ways to make these contact lenses actually fit on the eye sort of comfortably. So in the eye care world, we actually can measure the curvature of a cornea. And we use what are called keratometry readings, or the cool kids call that Ks. And so we actually, when we do an eye exam, we measure people's Ks, or keratometry readings. It tells us the surface curvature of a cornea. And that's kind of important if you're going to wear contacts, especially back in these days, is because they were able to figure out people's keratometry readings and then make a contact lens that was curved specific to that person's needs. And that's when we were able to repeatably and somewhat reliably create contact lenses that were sort of comfortable. And these two guys down here, Newton Wesley, who was an optometrist, he kind of became quite well known for his educational. He was able to educate other optometrists as to how they can do this. They were able to make this kind of take off a little bit. And over time, the material, the PMMA, they were able to make it thinner and more comfortable. And so that's pretty phenomenal. We're talking now we're entering the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which is not that far away. The PMMA material is still, let's remind ourselves, not oxygen permeable. So although it was more reliably fit and more comfortable, these lenses really still couldn't be safely worn for a long time. But it was still something that was just out of this world as far as an idea to make someone see better. If anybody knows anybody who has a high prescription, let's pretend like a -8 or -9 these days, most people who have a high prescription these days would do anything to not have to wear their glasses, or even wearing glasses in general. You don't have to have a high prescription to not want to wear your glasses with all the inconveniences that come with them. And so contact lenses, at least the idea of it, was becoming quite popular. But again, up until this point, it wasn't breathable and therefore not overly safe to use for long periods of time. Eventually, there was this guy named Otto Wichterly. He was a Czechoslovakian chemist who invented this material called hydrogel. And hydrogel was in the 50s, of course, and like it says on the slide there, but it was a gel intended for use on human body. He didn't necessarily create it for use on the eyeball, but there were a couple optometrists and an ophthalmologist who suggested to Mr. Wichterly that, hey, you know what, you could probably figure out a way to use that on the eyeball. And he kind of thought about this for a while, and he decided that he was going to decide to create a contact lens out of this new material he had created called hydrogel. Now, hydrogel starts as a liquid and then it has to be heated in order to turn into more of a solid state. And the only way he could figure out how to do this is like turn liquid into a shape, was that he could spin cast these things. So this is like, he had these little teeny bowls, as you can sort of see here. You can hardly see them. And they're spinning, and he would put liquid in, spin it at a certain rate, and apply heat to the material and allow it to solidify into its gel form. And he was able to sort of produce these contact lenses. As you can imagine, reproducing not only a shape but a power in the contact lens was rather difficult, but the concept was there. And over several decades, several optometrists throughout the world started to connect with this Wichterly guy and try to. They recognized that there was something there. One guy in particular named Robert or Bob Morrison in the U.S., he and Mr. Wichterly kind of formed this relationship where they would exchange ideas, figure out how they can make it better. Eventually, Mr. Wichterly sold the patent for this to Dr. Morrison in the U.S., and he had a lot of success with creating and producing contact lenses. And then in 1971, is when Bosch and Lomb purchased that eventually. I'm making a long story short here. Purchased the ability to create contact lenses out of this hydrogel material and use the same spin casting method. By the way, just as a historical, I mean, this whole presentation is about history. In the late 60s, the FDA, which, I mean, I live in Canada, but that's a U.S. Food and Drug Association, the FDA decided that a contact lens was a drug, and therefore there had to be a lot of regulations that they had to set forth for anyone producing a contact lens. So eventually, after Bosch and Lomb purchased the patent and the rights for this material and the way of producing it, they were able to create the very first soft contact lens, or at least not the first, but it was just one of the first commercially available soft contact lenses in 1971. So that was a pretty big deal. And that is, I mean, it was already starting to take off with these hard PMMA corneal lenses, but this is where it really started to go forward because hydrogel is a lot more comfortable to put in your eyeball than a piece of plastic like plexiglass, or I guess PMMA we'll keep calling it. So that was pretty great. And in the 70s, things started really to take off. Now, at the same time, rigid contact lenses, keep in mind, were still more common and more popular. And they started to recognize that oxygen to the eye was really important. I mean, we all know that now, and they kind of knew that then, but they tried to figure out ways to get some sort of material, a hard material that would actually be more breathable. And so around the same time, in the mid to late 70s, rigid contact lenses, by the way, the cool kids call them RGPs, so rigid gas permeable contact lenses. I just realized my slide is incorrect. It's supposed to say RGPs, not RPGs. But anyway, so RGPs, rigid gas permeable contact lenses, they were able to produce a material that was thinner and breathable, which is crazy back then for sure. But for us, that's normal. But back then, that was pretty great. And so at the same time as soft contact lenses were starting to take off, the hard lenses were becoming more and more perfected. And so you had these two groups of contact lens wearers. You had the soft contact lens wearers and the hard contact lens wearers. Let's just take a moment. Which one do you think was more comfortable? Which one do you think had provided better vision? And which one was better for your eye health? And I can answer those questions back in these days, in these late 70s. The comfort was far superior with a soft contact lens, but actually the vision and the eye health was far superior with these rigid gas permeable contact lenses. As you can see, I wrote it properly up there this time. So although the comfort was there, the vision and eye health was far superior with these hard contact lenses, and the soft contact lens world recognized that. And so they set off on this journey of their own to figure out how they could get the soft lenses to be more breathable and better for eye health. And they started to figure out how to do that. And the way to do it is actually by adding water to the hydrogel material. They already had been adding, I guess, a little bit of water to it, but they figured out that if you added more water to silicone, to hydrogel, then the lens would be more breathable. And then you started seeing things like these packages here. So here we have Bosch & Lomb Soft Lens 38. This 38 represents the percentage of water that was in the hydrogel. And of course, Bosch & Lomb Soft Lens 59 had more water, was therefore more breathable. Now there's a limit to how much water you can put in hydrogel before it becomes too flimsy and unable to actually hold its shape. And so they were able to, over time, figure out kind of what some of the best type of water content in a hydrogel lens. I should mention, this is a picture I took of in my own clinic of a cornea that doesn't have enough oxygen. I'm not going to bore you with the stories of these things, but this is just someone who decided to wear their contact lenses way longer than they should have. I'll go into more detail with that, but let's stick for now with the topic of the water content in a hydrogel material. As soon as that started happening, meaning they figured out that water in hydrogel was really a very breathable and very feasible option to provide people with safe, relatively safe, and and a comfortable contact lens experience. And so other companies started to come into play here. So the AccuView product, which many of us know all too well, Bausch & Lomb, of course, continued to produce their own. Other companies like CooperVision and produced lenses like ProClear. Things started to take off. I mean, they had started making contact lenses for astigmatism through these couple decades, through the 70s and 90s, contact lenses for bifocal contact lenses, colored contact lenses, all sorts of contact lenses. And this is really where the contact lens industry started to become normal in the public eye. So all these companies started to jump on board to produce something that people could wear and see well with. And however, I had a university professor talk to us as students frequently about what he called how people were incredibly stupid. And I chuckled and kind of shook my head a little bit about when he'd say that. But now that I've been practicing optometry for 10 years, I get what he's saying. I probably wouldn't use the same words, but I would just say unwise. People became very unwise with how they use their contacts. I mean, think about it. People were able to see well, putting something in their eye, and they started to abuse them. People would wear them too long. They were not replacing them when they were supposed to. They weren't cleaning them properly, and they were sleeping in them. All of these pictures, with the exception of this one, were taken in my own office. I'll just take a moment to explain this. Hydrogel, even though it was more breathable, was still not safe to use overnight. It wasn't breathable enough for overnight use. So with the early hydrogel material, if people were sleeping in them, this is what you'd see regularly. This is a cornea that is it's in a state of hypoxia. It does not have enough oxygen. You can't see well out of that, and that's a painful experience. Way down over here, bacterial infections were extremely common. As you can imagine, bacteria on a warm surface like a cornea with a nice material on top of the cornea that kept it nice and warm, and the blink would not rub it away. Perfect breeding ground for bacterial infections. And so corneal ulcers were a very common thing to see. And then the lenses themselves would gather protein deposits. Our tears have lots of proteins in them, and they would just deposit themselves on the lens. And so if you wore the lenses too long, not cleaning them properly and so forth, they would develop these protein deposits. Again, this is something a picture I took in my own office. And then not only does the cornea, when it doesn't have enough oxygen, does it just totally panic like what you see here, but it also sends additional blood vessels onto the cornea. So they call this corneal neovascularization. I didn't have a super great picture in my office. I do see it, but this is a great picture where you can actually see the blood vessels growing from the sclera onto the cornea. And so this is kind of the state of this is what optometrists and ophthalmologists dealt with when people were fit with contacts and didn't obey the rules. And so this became a super big problem because people weren't listening to the rules that were set forth. And so they tried to figure out, how can we make people be more wise, or other words, less stupid, I guess is what my professor would say, but more wise with the use of their contact lenses. And so they started making one-day contact lenses. This concept was revolutionary, even in our day today. It eliminated the whole not replacing them when you should, because they were supposed to be throwing them out after one day of use. You didn't have to clean them, which is fantastic. And obviously, because they were being worn one day, they weren't going to be worn when they were sleeping. So that was pretty fantastic. The cost, there was some disadvantages. It's more expensive. I mean, that's 365 lenses per eye per year, and therefore there was a lot of waste that went along with this. But the health aspects were just kind of like no-brainers for optometrists and ophthalmologists to save our patients' lives, our vision, I guess we could say. Now, interestingly, they did some studies in the UK when dailies started coming out and becoming popular to figure out if bacterial infections would reduce with the use of one-day contact lenses. And they did a study, and they realized that people who wore one-day contact lenses had higher risks, if not equal to the people who wore their monthly lenses. And this really perplexed the people that were running the studies. So they went back and they surveyed the people who had all these bacterial infections, and it turns out that every one of them had been wearing a one-day lens for more than one way. one day. And therefore, we come back to the same abuse of contact lenses. And so, yeah, if anyone wears contact lenses, please follow the rules, which I'll get to lots more of. So even though we have made leaps and bounds with the material of the soft lens, hydrogel, adding water to the hydrogel material, making it more breathable, with one-day lenses, we're saying don't sleep in them because they're not intended to be worn for more than one day. Don't bother cleaning them either. We were really getting places. And then something awesome happened. People discovered that if you put silicone in the hydrogel material, it became way more breathable. Like not just a little bit more breathable, lots more breathable. And that was a pretty fantastic discovery. It was so fantastic. They discovered that the use of this silicone plus hydrogel material was actually safe to use overnight. And then we started seeing commercials like this one. By the way, the first company to introduce a silicone hydrogel lens, at least that was a FDA approved and so forth, was a company called Vision, which is now known as Alcon. But they produced a lens called Air Optics Night and Day, and they started advertising it just like this. I hope I can get this to work and be in the screen. So here we go. This is how the commercials that you would see back in the late 90s, early 2000s.
I never meant to sleep in my contacts, but...
Relax. Air Optics Night and Day Aqua contact lenses are approved for up to 30 days and nights of continuous wear, so it's okay to sleep in them.
Visit airoptics.com for a free 1-month trial.
That is great. I'm chuckling because we don't recommend that these days. But back then, it was their solution to all the problems. We had a lens that was breathable. It was FDA approved to use overnight. We had a lot of great stuff into that. And hey, that would solve a lot of the issues. Unfortunately, that didn't solve as many issues as they thought. But the material, the silicone hydrogel material, was really the thing to do. And so all the companies, Johnson & Johnson, Bausch & Lomb, Cooper Vision, all these companies started making silicone hydrogel lenses. To them, that solved the not wearing too long problem and the sleeping in them problem. All of a sudden, people could sleep in their contact lenses and it was safe. At least so they thought. And so in the 2000s, mid to late 2000s, all these companies started jumping on board with this silicone hydrogel thing. The unfortunate thing is, remember, coming back to how people are unwise with things that they're given, the consumer totally took this a little bit the wrong way, actually a lot the wrong way. As you can imagine, with commercials like we just showed you, the consumer thought, great, I can sleep in my contact lenses. If it's safe to wear for days on end, 30 days on end without removing them, then I don't have to clean them. I don't have to take them out ever. And my optometrist says it's okay. So the consumer thought, well, great, I don't have to worry about wearing them too long, sleeping in them, or anything. So to them, all the problems were solved. But remember that the optometrists realized they should still be used with wisdom, but the consumer did not get that full message, as you can imagine, with commercials like what we just watched. And so we really started to see that there were some still problems, but there were tons of advantages. By the way, in the contact lens world, when we talk about oxygen permeability, we use a unit called dK/T. And silicone hydrogel was amazing. The dK/T of silicone hydrogel was just phenomenal. They were easier to handle. There was less water needed for them. They're less flimsy. They're less prone to protein deposits, and far less incidence of corneal hypoxia, corneal neovascularization, and even bacterial infections were reduced with the use of silicone hydrogel. So even though the consumer kind of got it wrong, a lot of things were going right. Let's just look at this here. Again, more abuse with better products. So we have kind of fixed the idea of hypoxia. It can still happen, but it's very rare nowadays if anyone's wearing a silicone hydrogel lens. You don't get proteins depositing on silicone hydrogel lenses because You just don't. Instead, you get lipid deposits, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Corneal neovascularization was significantly reduced with silicone hydrogel. But remember, the people who abused their hydrogel lenses moved to silicone hydrogel lenses, and their neovascularization, it doesn't disappear. Those vessels stay there. They don't recede. And so even now, to this day, I still see a lot of corneal neovascularization that started 30 years ago when people started wearing their contact lenses and abusing them. Even though corneal ulcers and bacterial infections were still around, they were happening a little bit less. I didn't feel comfortable enough to put a check mark here. I probably shouldn't even have put check marks on any of these other things, but they were much less of a problem with the silicone hydrogel lenses compared to the original hydrogel lenses. With the change in materials, there needed to be a change in solution as well. And this is just one example, and this still kind of drives me crazy a little bit, but Optifree, which is a very popular disinfection solution or multi-purpose solution for contact lenses, back in the hydrogel days, they made this product called Optifree Express. And then they decided to make a solution for silicone hydrogel lenses called Optifree Replenish. You'll notice that the S and the H are capitalized to represent silicone hydrogel. Nobody else knew that except the optometrists out there, but that, unfortunately, they made their bottles look very similar. The packaging was similar. I guess they were rolling with a good brand that people would recognize, but people started using the wrong solution for the wrong lenses, even though their optometrists would tell them not to, or at least try to. So all of a sudden you have people wearing silicone hydrogel lenses using this material or this solution that was meant for hydrogel, and vice versa. That's a big problem. And part of the reason they had to change the solutions is because silicone is hydrophobic. This is the same stuff that you put in your bathrooms to seal water. Okay, so this is not water friendly, and therefore bacteria had a harder time sticking to it, but so did moisture. And so comfort was a big problem for anyone who was trying to make a silicone hydrogel lens. They were putting silicone in, which made the oxygen permeability higher, but water was not able to be absorbed into the material very well. And that's why we started seeing lipid deposits. Lipid just is another way of saying fats, because silicone is hydrophobic. Therefore, lipids were able to stick to it way better. And so the cleaning materials had to change. I'm kind of going all over the place, but I think you get the idea of lots of this stuff. Going to this chart here, this talks about how with the original hydrogel lens, which is shown in green, those original hydrogel lenses, the more water you put in it, which is found down here, the more breathable the lens is. But the opposite is true with silicone hydrogel. So with the silicone hydrogel lens, the less water you put in it, the more breathable it is. And down here, by this time they had discovered that there were limits to the cornea, and so they determined that the absolute minimum dk over T value to avoid corneal edema is 24. And that just means that if you're wearing a contact lens that's less than 24, even if it's a one-day lens, don't wear it. And the minimum dk over T for extended wear, which just means sleeping in your contacts, is 86. And so they, these are important factors. So back to the silicone problem, that it's hydrophobic. All the companies that were making these determined their own method of being able to put in the silicone into the contact lens and still making it comfortable. And these are examples of things. When contact lens manufacturers come to me and tell me about their new products, they'll usually end up showing me some sort of fancy diagram to show that they are able to put silicone and hydrogel material together and make it wettable and comfortable for people. I don't think you can see this very well, but Air Optics, for instance, which was CibaVision's first, or I guess second if you discount, if you include Air Optics Night and Day, was their first contact lens that was a silicone hydrogel. It wasn't super comfortable. Well, it was, but they realized they could make it more comfortable, so they came up with something called Air Optics Aqua. And then more recently, they came up with Air Optics with Hydrogel. So all these things are examples of ways they were able to get the silicone hydrogel matrix to be more water, not permeable, but just more hydrophilic. And there's a lot of other factors that contribute to the comfort of a contact lens. I'll just name a few. I don't mean to bore you with stuff, but hey, you decided to watch up to this point. But these are some examples of lenses on the market right now. We have Bausch & Lomb Ultra, AccuView Oasis, Air Optics Aqua, and Biofinity. All of these have edge profiles. Some of these types of edge profiles are more comfortable for certain people compared to others. And there's other things like the modulus, and this is, I don't even think you can see this very well, but the modulus is just a way of, it's a number that we use to represent how flimsy or non-flimsy it is. The higher the modulus, the more rigid the lens feels in your fingers. Some people like really soft modulus contact lenses, and other people do better with higher modulus. And then the wetting angle, which is kind of a more recent thing in the last 10 years, but they figured out that if they put a droplet on the silicone hydrogel material of a company's contact lens, the angle that the water bead sits is a huge indicator of the comfort of the contact lens. So let's just review some of the big names. I promise I'm getting closer to the end of this presentation. We've got Alcon, which used to be Ciba Vision, and so they actually purchased some of the RGP stuff in the 70s as well, or the rigid gas permeable contacts. And they, of course, were famous for producing the first silicone hydrogel lens that they advertised that people should sleep in. By the way, we don't tell patients they should sleep in their contacts anymore because the risk of bacterial infection is really high. Of course, people still remember the commercials, and lots of people can still wear their contacts for days on end without problems. And of course, guess what they tell their friends? They'll say, hey, I sleep in my contacts all the time and I've never had any problems. Well, as an optometrist, I'll tell you, it will come. If you sleep in your contact lenses, even though you've been able to do so for decades maybe, eventually it'll catch up to you and you'll probably run into a bacterial infection of some sort. Sorry, back to the slide. Bausch & Lomb became famous back in 71 when they produced their first soft lens made out of the original hydrogel material. Johnson & Johnson kind of made headway with their AccuView products. All of their products are UV protectant, which is unique to, no other company has all of their lenses be UV protected. So they made a lot of headway. And then, of course, Cooper Vision, they actually became famous for lots of reasons, but one is that their silicone hydrogel material, they were able to find a way to put water in their silicone hydrogel, a lot of it, and still make it breathable. And it's still kind of one of these mysteries that we still don't quite understand how they did it, but it worked out very well. Here are some examples of reusable contact lenses. When I say reusable, I just mean like a 2-week or a 1-month contact lens. Now, I didn't list all of them. I'm sure I'm offending some sort of contact lens manufacturer by not including their lens in here. But these are kind of the more popular 1-month contact lenses. You'll notice that all of them are silicone hydrogel material. It's very rare that you find an original hydrogel lens that's meant for a 1-month use. You can still find them. They still exist, and guess what? They're super cheap to buy on the internet, but people don't always know what they're getting. They think they're getting a great deal, but they're getting a garbage product. I'm probably offending some contact lens manufacturers, but just know that not all contact lenses are built the same. We have the water content listed here. The breathability, the most breathable contact lens still on the market is this Air Optics Night and Day. And then here are some of the other values. The modulus, each of these lenses has a base curve, a diameter, and some of them have UV protection and some don't. And so those are some contact lenses, the more popular 1-month contact lenses. Let's go to the dailies now. Now the daily contact lenses are an extremely popular thing. We have some that are hydrogel lenses and some that are silicone hydrogel lenses. Guess what the difference is? Well, obviously the material and also the cost. If you're trying to buy a silicone hydrogel OneDay lens, those are going to be more comfortable generally, more expensive, and more healthy. So we've got comfort and health at the exchange of cost. And so because it's a daily lens and it's a little more costly, we find that a lot of people still like the original hydrogel material just simply because of cost. Remember, if you're sleeping in a one-day lens, which should never happen, but certainly it does, that is a very bad idea. And that picture I showed you earlier of corneal hypoxia was a person who was wearing their one-day contact lens for weeks on end, and no surprise, dealt with some pretty major problems. I won't keep dwelling on this slide. Oh, but I do want to bring this up. This is maybe not as popular now, but a few years ago, a company called Hubble produced a hydrogel one-day lens, and they treated it like you get a subscription from us and we will send you 30 one-day lenses every month, and you don't have to go to your optometrist to order contact lenses. Well, guess what? The DK over T of the Hubble contact lenses is 18, and if you remember, the minimum required for safe use is 24. So do optometrists love this lens? Absolutely not. And we try not to make our patients feel bad when they tell us they're wearing them, but we kindly suggest you should probably do something different. Even though it's cheap and effective, it's not safe. This is a slide I could probably have skipped, but it's really important because just to show that rigid lens materials have come light years as well. And so these are a whole bunch of hard materials that produce that we can make contacts out of, and they're very breathable. They also have the DK over T and stuff like that listed on the side there. So there's some other ones that I didn't talk about. I don't have time to talk about all the contact lens stuff, but there's something called Ortho keratology. This is actually a hard lens that you sleep in, and it reshapes the cornea while you sleep, much like a pair of braces on your teeth, and then when you wake up, you take out the contact lens and you can see. It's very effective, although it's not for everybody. It only works to about a -4-ish, at least in my clinic. That's as high as I'll fit. And you have to have almost no astigmatism to get the best vision, but it does work. And then we also have modern day scleral contact lenses. These are actually, maybe I have some, just a second. I do. So this is a modern day scleral contact lens. Maybe I should just change the scene here. This is what it looks like. So this is obviously this is a dirty one, but that's fit these days, and it's actually really comfortable. Even though they're large and intimidating, they are fantastic, and they help with problems that can't be helped with in any other way, like severe dry eyes, or if your corneas are really misshapen, if you have keratoconus, that's kind of the way to treat it. So just know that there are other contact lenses out there. This is a pretty interesting slide. I really wish you could see it better on your screens, but this is just kind of giving us a perspective of what the world is doing. So we have Canada, which is where I live, is listed here. This says daily disposable hydrogel, daily disposable silicone hydrogel, reusable daily wear silicone hydrogel, and so forth. And about 47% of people in Canada wear a monthly lens that's made of silicone hydrogel. A large portion also wear one-day lenses that are made of silicone hydrogel, and much less wear the hydrogel one-day lenses. If you go down here, this is the UK, and then this is the US. We're a lot more like our UK counterparts in how we fit contact lenses compared to the US. The US has far less people. By the way, this is from 2018, so it's changed since then, but were far less people, and probably still are far less people in the US wearing one-day lenses, and more people are wearing monthly lenses. They're probably the highest in the world, as you can see in this list in the US, that wear a monthly lens. Some other things to highlight. This right here is China, CN. 61% wear Ortho keratology. Those are those hard lenses I just barely mentioned that you sleep in and reshape your cornea. The reason that that's so popular in China is Ortho keratology not only works, but we figured out that it reduces the risk and the rate of progression of nearsightedness in children. Anyone who has children who need glasses who are nearsighted will realize that their child's prescription will change very predictably from year to year. And they just get worse and worse until their late teens, early 20s. But if the person's wearing ortho keratology lenses, it reduces the risk significantly. And in China, myopia or nearsightedness is an epidemic. And this is this is a very popular method of reducing the risk of progression. So just know that what's popular and normal in one country is not necessarily popular and normal in another country. We're getting very close to the end. Let me just finish off by telling you a couple extra things here. But in the world, people discontinue contact lenses for a lot of reasons. Here are some most common reasons for people to discontinue wearing their contacts. Problems with their vision. Second is because they're uncomfortable. And actually third is because they have a hard time handling them or putting them in and out, those kinds of problems. And so people discontinue wearing their contacts for lots of reasons, but those are the most common ones. As far as what the future holds for contact lenses, they actually predict, and this may shock some of you, that the rigid gas permeable contact lenses, and that includes orthokeratology and those modern scleral lenses I showed you, are expected to exhibit the fastest growth rate between the years of 2020 and 2025. And that actually doesn't surprise me at all, because I'm fitting a lot more of those nowadays. But to the rest of the world, that might sound very strange. But that's the way that things are going, and I can tell you that's probably very accurate. This concludes the presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I did not include all that you needed to know, but hopefully it was useful. As I mentioned, this video is meant for people who work at my office for their continued education, but it's also something that people in the world might find interesting. I thank you for watching and have a fantastic contact lens wearing experience. I should mention before I leave, if your optometrist fits you with contact lenses, please obey their recommendations. If you don't, you'll run into problems that they will have to fix and you will regret. Even though you might think you're saving money by wearing your contacts longer, it's not the best idea. I wish contact lenses were like milk. That sounds like the dumbest thing to say, but listen, milk smells bad, it has an expiry date, and it's gross after that expiry date, and very few people will drink it, even though technically it's safe. But contact lenses are not like that. After they're old, they look the same, they smell the same, people see the same with their contacts, and so therefore people feel like they're saving themselves money by wearing their contacts more than they should, longer, to stretch them out, but you will indefinitely run into problems. Trust me, even though you may have been doing it for years, it will catch up to you. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, you can come ask me.